Lewis Wall.
Tēnā koe te māngai o te whare, not one more of our Tamariki mokopuna. I think that needs to be the position of this House. My contribution today will focus on the updated objects and principles in the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Act 1989, and I want to focus on where they came from. And I'd just like to read from Section 13 of the current SIFS Act. Section 13 2B, the principle that the primary role in caring for and protecting a child or young person lies with the child's or young person's family, whānau, hapu, iwi and family group. Now, where did that come from? Actually, it came from a report of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on the Māori perspective for the Department of Social Welfare. And if you Google it, what it says is that this is a detailed commentary and inquiry into racism within New Zealand society, and in particular within the Department of Social Welfare. The relevance of this piece of legislation to Māori is actually monumental. Between 1955 and 1985, there were 45,000 closed stranger adoptions. Most of those were Māori children who were placed within Pākehā families. Today, we're talking about 5,000 children in state care. 3,000 of those children are Māori. So the relevance of this particular piece of legislation to Māori is huge. I also want to quote from the Puaoteatatu report on page 7, and I quote, "At the heart of the issue is a profound misunderstanding or ignorance of the place of the child in Māori society and its relationship with whānau, hapu, iwi structures." Currently, there are over 26 references to whānau, hapu and iwi in the child, youth and family legislation. When this piece of legislation goes through, there will be only 6, and the biggest issue that we have is that kin placements or Māori children being placed within whānau, hapu and iwi will cease to be a priority. In 2012, the Families Commission published a report by Dr. Fiona Cram. It was a very interesting report because what it did was looked at children in care and noted that worldwide, Indigenous children were overrepresented in child welfare systems. And these were the reasons: systemic racism, the application of white middle-class standards and values to Indigenous communities, and also intergenerational fragmentation of the family and community structure. So really it was a commentary about the continued consequence of colonisation. And it was exacerbated by structural risk factors, and those were poor housing and poverty. And so that context, I think, is incredibly important, especially when we try to answer the question, who is best to care for Māori children? Well, from Puaoteatatu, who's best to care for Māori children? It actually is whānau. Ultimately, it's the children's parents. If they're unavailable, then we're looking at grandparents. We're looking at their aunties and uncles. We're looking at siblings, cousins. But ultimately, why do we want children placed within whānau? Because it's within whānau that we know who we are and where we come from. Who we are and where we come from is about our identity. And that's where our whakapapa is incredibly important. Who helps answer that question, ko waio? Ko tongariro te maunga, ko taupo te moana. Aren't I really lucky? I can quote my pepeha. I know where my maunga is. I know where my awa is. I know where my marae is. I know who I am. And so, unfortunately, I think the implementation of the legislation has really been about shifting responsibility from the state to any other kin carer. And it didn't matter who they were, because what we have never done is fully implement the findings and the recommendations of Puaoteatatu. Professor Mason Jury actually in 2006 presented to Treasury, and he presented a whole lot of indicators of measuring Māori wellbeing. But central to that was the capacity of manaakitanga, and that is about the capacity of the family to care for itself and for its tamariki and the mokopuna. And why is that so fundamental? Because actually it's about access to te reo, to tikanga Māori, to what makes you who you are. And so if we erode that from this piece of legislation, essentially what we're saying is that as a Māori Indigenous person of Aotearoa, we can go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s and place you outside of your whānau hapu and iwi, and you can be brought up by some random, and that's in your best interest. Well, Mr. Speaker, we refute that fundamental principle. Thank you.
Pamjit Pama.